The fluorescent lights in the OR hummed at a frequency I'd memorized years ago. I stood at the scrub sink, water running over my hands, counting the seconds the way they taught us. 30 seconds minimum, 30 seconds that felt like nothing after a 12-hour shift. I didn't look up when the door swung open behind me. Serrano. I recognized my father's voice before I turned around. He was still in his white coat, badge clipped to the breast pocket, silver hair combed back the way he'd worn it my entire life. He looked the same as he always did, composed. Certain of himself, I kept scrubbing. Dad. I said it flat, the way you say it when you've run out of warmth for a word. He crossed his arms. I heard you're presenting at the Whitmore conference next month. That's right. The vascular panel. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. The water kept running. I watched the soap disappear down the drain. That's a senior panel, Elise. I turned off the tap with my elbow. I know what panel it is. I'm just saying. He stopped. Cleared his throat. There are attendings with 15-20 years on you who've been waitlisted for that spot. I pulled a paper towel from the dispenser. Dried my hands slowly. Is there something you needed, or did you come in here to make sure I understood the situation? He didn't answer that. He just looked at me the way he'd looked at me my whole life. Like I was a problem he hadn't solved yet. Like I was a rounding error in his otherwise clean data. I walked past him and into the OR. I should tell you how we got here. My father, Dr. Elise Serrano, has been chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Mercy General in Philadelphia for 22 years. He was named in Philadelphia Magazine's top physicians list 11 consecutive times. He has a plaque in the hospital lobby. His name is on a research wing. My mother left when I was 9. She didn't leave dramatically. No suitcases in the night, no screaming. She just started spending weekends at her sister's in Maryland. And then the weekends got longer. And then one morning I came downstairs and my father was making eggs alone, and he never mentioned her again. I learned not to either. I have a brother. His name is Derek, and he was always the one our father talked about. Derek was pre-med at Penn. Derek was doing research in our father's lab over summers. Derek was going to follow in the family tradition. I was the one who sat quietly at dinner and asked questions our father considered inconvenient. Why do more women die from heart attacks because their symptoms get dismissed? Silence. Why does our hospital have a 12% higher readmission rate for Black patients? A look. Why is Dr. Tarv, Matthew, still practicing after what happened in 2019? A very long silence, and then, Elise, you don't understand how institutions work. That was his answer to most things I asked. You don't understand. Said patiently, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it with anger. I went to Johns Hopkins for undergrad. I applied without telling him. He found out when the acceptance letter arrived and he opened it. He still opened all the mail, and he set it on my placemat at dinner without a word. I thought that was a good sign. I was 16. I didn't yet know that silence from him wasn't neutrality. It was just a longer kind of no. I got into medical school at Penn, my father's alma mater. I thought maybe that would matter to him. It didn't matter. What mattered, I learned slowly, was that I had chosen to specialize in vascular surgery when he thought I should go into cardiothoracic, the harder specialty, the more serious one, the one that produces real surgeons, and that I had, in his words, too many opinions for a resident, and that I asked questions in grand rounds that made the attendings uncomfortable, and that I wrote a letter to the department chair about a surgeon who was cutting corners on informed consent, and that letter had consequences for someone he respected. And after that, things between us became something I don't have a clean word for. Not cold. Cold implies absence of heat. This was something more active. It was a steady, deliberate withholding. He never said you don't belong here. He said it in other ways. The research opportunity he circulated to his residents, I heard about it from a colleague. He hadn't forwarded it to me. It seemed like it wasn't in your area, he said when I asked. My area was vascular surgery. The research was on peripheral arterial disease. I published in that exact area the following year. When I made chief resident, he shook my hand at the ceremony. Brief, practiced. The same handshake he gave the hospital board members, not the way you touch your daughter when something good happens to her. When I got divorced at 29, a quiet, undramatic end to a marriage that had never quite learned how to breathe, he called once. 3 minutes. Asked if I was going to be okay financially. I said yes. He said good. That was it. I kept working. That was all I knew how to do. The Whitmore Cardiovascular Conference is held every year in Chicago. It's not the biggest conference in the field, but it's considered the one that matters, the one where you present work that actually moves something, that gets cited, that changes how people in small hospitals in rural Ohio make decisions that affect real patients. Getting a slot on the vascular panel as an attending in your early 30s was unusual enough that 3 different people at Mercy General mentioned it to me in the same week. My father mentioned it to make sure I understood the pressure. Other people mentioned it because they were genuinely happy for me. I had spent 2 years on the research behind the presentation. It was a retrospective analysis of outcomes in patients with critical limb ischemia who received early intervention versus delayed intervention based on insurance classification. The short version, patients with Medicare or Medicaid were waiting an average of 41 more days for intervention than privately insured patients with identical clinical presentations. Those 41 days had measurable consequences. Limb loss, in some cases mortality. The data were clean. The implications were uncomfortable. That's why I did it. 3 weeks before the conference, my father called me into his office. He had a corner office on the 4th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. He'd worked for that view for 3 decades, and he treated it with the reverence of someone who understood exactly what it cost. I sat in the chair across from his desk the way I had 100 times as a child, waiting to be told what I had done wrong or what I didn't understand. "I've been thinking about your presentation," he said. "Okay. The data are solid." A pause. This was high praise from him. I noted it. "But the framing concerns me." "Which framing?" "The way you've positioned the insurance disparity angle." He leaned back, folded his hands. "It's going to read as political. It's going to read as data. Elise, that one word, patient, slightly tired. You don't understand how institutions work. The Whitmore is attended by department chairs, hospital administrators, insurance executives. If you walk in there and present this as an indictment of the reimbursement system, I'm presenting outcomes. The data indict the system. I'm just showing the data." You could frame it differently. Focus on the clinical protocol side. The early intervention recommendation stands on its own without the part that explains why the early intervention isn't happening. I kept my voice even. If I strip the disparity data, I'm presenting an incomplete picture. Clinicians will walk away thinking this is about protocol adherence when it's actually about access. He looked at me for a long moment. The way he used to look at me at dinner. "Problem not yet solved." "I'm trying to help you," he said. "I know you think that." I stood up. He didn't stop me. I flew to Chicago on a Thursday in October. The conference hotel was one of those places on Michigan Avenue that makes you feel like the city is performing for you. The lake visible from the lobby, the light coming through in that particular October way that makes everything feel both beautiful and temporary. I checked in, changed my clothes, and went down to the opening reception with my badge and a glass of water and the specific kind of calm I'd been building for 33 years. I knew some people in the room. Colleagues from residency, a few attendings I respected. One woman I'd done a fellowship with who hugged me and said, "I heard about your spot on the vascular panel. That's incredible," and meant it in a way that landed softly. I also saw Dr. Franken Pierce, who ran the cardiothoracic program at a hospital in Boston and who had been my father's fellow 25 years ago. He was the kind of man who stood in the center of rooms and let the room organize itself around him. He looked at my badge and then at my face and said, "Serrano, Gerald's daughter?" "That's right. You're presenting tomorrow." "I am." He smiled with his mouth. "That's a tough panel. Lot of big names." "I'm aware." He tilted his head slightly, the way people do when they're about to say something they've already decided they're entitled to say. "Gerald must be proud." I looked at him steadily. "You'd have to ask him." I excused myself and found a quiet corner near the window. The vascular panel ran from 9 to noon on Friday. There were 4 presentations. I was third. I had given presentations before grand rounds, regional conferences, smaller symposia. I understood the mechanics of it. You know your material or you don't, and if you do, the anxiety is just noise. But I'd be lying if I said my hands were completely steady when I walked to the podium. Not from fear, from something else. The particular feeling of being about to say something true in a room full of people who might not want to hear it. I looked out at the audience. 300 people, maybe. Physicians, researchers, administrators. I found Dr. Pierce in the third row. I found the woman from my fellowship in the eighth. I didn't find my father because he wasn't there. He had never said he was coming. I had never asked. I began. I presented the data methodically. The patient population, the clinical criteria, the intervention timelines broken down by insurance classification. I put the 41-day gap on the screen and I let it sit there. I talked about what 41 days means clinically in a patient with critical limb ischemia. I talked about the outcomes data without softening the numbers. The room was quiet in a specific way that rooms get when the information is landing. I said, the protocol recommendation is clear. Early intervention improves outcomes. What this data shows us is that the protocol is being followed selectively, and the variable that predicts whether it's followed is not clinical. It's financial. If we want to implement this recommendation equitably, we have to be honest about why it currently isn't. I finished. I stood at the podium while the room processed. Then they applauded. Not politely. The kind of applause that has some weight to it. That means something was heard. During the Q&A, a woman in the second row, department chair from Stanford, I recognize her from her work, asked me about the methodology for controlling confounding variables. We went back and forth for 4 minutes. It was a good 4 minutes. The kind of intellectual exchange that makes you remember why you chose this. Dr. Pierce did not ask a question. Afterward, in the hallway, 3 people stopped me. A researcher from Minnesota who said she'd been sitting on similar data and hadn't known how to present it. A young resident, maybe 27, who looked at me with an expression I recognized because I had worn it, the expression of someone filing something away for later use. And a woman named Dr. Catherine Osei from Cleveland Clinic, who shook my hand and said, I want to talk to you about a multi-center study. Are you free for lunch? We had lunch. We talked for 2.5 hours. By the time we left the restaurant, we had the outline of something real. I walked back to the hotel along the lake. The wind was doing what Chicago wind does in October. I had my coat pulled close and my badge still clipped to my lapel, swinging slightly. I thought about my father. I thought about his office and the window and the 3 decades that window had cost him. I thought about what he'd said. You could frame it differently. I thought about the patients in my data, the ones who waited 41 extra days. Some of them were fine. Some of them lost a limb. A few of them were dead. I thought, no, I couldn't have framed it differently. The framing was the truth. The framing was the whole point. My father called that evening. I almost didn't pick up. I heard it went well, he said. It did. A pause. Pierce called me, said the data were compelling. Another pause. Longer. In that pause, I could hear everything he didn't know how to say. The 33 years of dinner tables and opened mail and handshakes, the research opportunity he hadn't forwarded, the way he'd said the harder specialty, the more serious one. The way he'd called once after my divorce and asked about my finances. I should have come, he finally said. I sat with that for a moment. Yes, I said. You should have. He didn't say anything. I have an early flight tomorrow, I said. I'll talk to you later. I hung up. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and looked at the wall for a while, not crying, not angry. Something quieter than either of those things. I had wanted, for most of my life, for my father to see me, to actually look at the work and say, this is good, and you are good, and I am glad you are mine. I had wanted it so long that the wanting had become structural, load-bearing, built into the way I moved through the world. But sitting there in that hotel room, I understood something I hadn't understood clearly before. His seeing me would have been wonderful. His not seeing me had not stopped me. I had done the work without his eyes on it. I had built the methodology, collected the data, stood at the podium and said the true thing in a room that didn't entirely want to hear it. And none of that had required his approval to be real. The 41 days were real. Dr. Osei's call was real. The resident in the hallway with the filing it away expression was real. I had spent years trying to earn a kind of recognition that was never going to come the way I needed it to, from the person I needed it from. And somewhere along the way, in the hour at midnight, in the statistics software at 2 in the morning, in the scrub sink counting seconds, I had built something anyway. Not for him, not anymore. For the woman I'd been at 9 years old, eating breakfast alone, learning not to ask about her mother. For the resident I'd been, writing that letter about informed consent knowing it would cost me something. For every patient in my data who waited 41 days while someone looked at their insurance code and made a decision that had nothing to do with medicine. For the fact that I'd always known what I was doing and why. The multi-center study with Dr. Osa launched 8 months later. We had 6 sites across 4 states. The paper we published ran in the Journal of Vascular Surgery and got picked up by 3 health policy newsletters and, eventually, a small piece in the New York Times health section. I read that piece on my phone while eating lunch at my desk. And I felt something I'd felt before, but still couldn't name exactly. Not pride, something quieter. The feeling of a long equation finally balancing. My father texted me a link to the Times piece with no other message, just the link. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put my phone in my drawer and went back to work. Derek called that night, which he almost never did. He was a pediatrician in Austin, had been for 5 years, had left our father's orbit early and quietly in a way I'd never quite understood until I did it myself. He said, "I saw the Times thing. It's great work, Elise." "Really? Thanks. Dad send you anything?" "A link." Derek laughed, short and tired. "Yeah, that sounds right." We talked for 40 minutes, which was longer than we talked in years. We talked about our mother a little. She was in Tucson now, had remarried, sent Christmas cards. We talked about Derek's kids. We talked about the kind of father our father had been, carefully, the way you pick up something you're not sure is fragile. At some point, Derek said, "Do you think he knew what he was doing?" I thought about it. I think he thought he was preparing us. For what? For the fact that the world wasn't going to hand us anything just because of whose kids we were. Or, Derek said, he just didn't know how to be warm and built a story around it. I didn't say anything for a moment. "Both things can be true," I said finally. "Yeah," a pause. "They can. I am 34 now. I run the vascular surgery program at Mercy General. Yes, the same hospital, though a different version of it than the one I trained in, or maybe I'm a different version of myself inside it. My father still practices, still has the corner office. We have dinner twice a year, usually on neutral territory, a restaurant neither of us chose first. He asks about the program. I tell him the true things, the parts that are going well, and I leave space for the parts I don't owe him. He has never said I was wrong about you. He has never said I should have forwarded that research opportunity. He has never asked about my divorce, the way a father asks about his daughter's broken heart. But last spring, at a department meeting, someone introduced me to a new attending, and without thinking about it, without performing it, my father said, "This is my daughter. She built the vascular program here. She built it." I looked at him. He was already turning back to his conversation, badge plicked to his coat, silver hair combed back the same way it had always been. I don't know what that moment was. I'm not sure it was enough. I'm not sure it was meant to be. But I heard it was meant to be. But I let it. And I let it be what it was. Small, imperfect, late. A man doing the best version of something he'd never learned to do well. I went back to my office. I had a patient at 2 o'clock. There is work that needs doing, and I am the one who does it, and that has always been enough. It took me a long time to understand that this was not a consolation. It was the whole thing. You do not need someone to witness your worth for it to be real. You just need to know it yourself, and then get back to work. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that night in the Chicago hotel room. Not in any mystical sense, just the plain, unromantic version of it. The idea that what you put in, consistently, over years, without applause, tends to produce something real. And the corollary, that what people withhold from you can either hollow you out or, if you let it, become a kind of fuel, My father withheld warmth. That's the honest way to say it. He wasn't cruel. I want to be precise about that, because precision matters to me. Probably because of him, actually. He was exacting and distant and convinced that softness was a disservice. And for a long time, I absorbed that as a verdict on me specifically, that I was the one not worth warmth, that the problem was located somewhere inside me. What I understand now is that the problem was his, and he passed it down the way people pass down anything they haven't examined. Automatically, without intention, wrapped inside something that looked like high standards. But here's what's also true. The standards were real. The work ethic was real. The insistence that you do the thing correctly or you don't do it at all. I carry that, and it has served me every day I have stood in an operating room. I didn't get to choose which parts of him I inherited. I just got to decide what I did with them. Elise spent years trying to earn something that was never going to be offered the way she needed it. I know that about myself now, looking back. Every paper I wrote, every letter I sent to the department chair, knowing it would cost me, every hour in the statistics software at 2 in the morning. Part of that was pure conviction in the work. And part of it was still, underneath, a daughter trying to be seen. Those two things coexisted for a long time. The shift happened so gradually I almost missed it. It wasn't one moment. It was 41 days. The number that kept appearing in my data. The gap between patients who got intervention and patients who waited, sorted by nothing clinical, just by what insurance card they carried. When I looked at that number long enough, something reorganized inside me. The work stopped being about my father's corner office and started being about those patients. Real people with real limbs and real mortality outcomes. The cause became external to my own need. And when that happened, I became harder to stop. That's the thing nobody tells you about finding your actual reason for doing something. It makes you almost indifferent to the obstacles. Not fearless. I was nervous at that podium. I have been nervous plenty of times. But indifferent to whether the room approves, because the room's approval was never the point. Dr. Pierce's opinion was never the point. Even my father's pride was never the point. The point was the 41 days. The point was Dr. Osei calling from Cleveland. The point was the resident in the hallway with the filing it away expression, storing something for later that might change how she treats a patient in 15 years. That's how things actually move. Not through approval. Through work that is honest about what it sees, even when what it sees is uncomfortable, even when the people in the room would prefer a gentler framing. My father built something too. I can see that now. He built a program over 30 years through discipline and precision and a belief that medicine demanded your best, always. He just didn't know how to build a daughter at the same time. Both things can be true. I'm not waiting anymore for the version of acknowledgement I wanted. What I have is better. The knowledge that I built something real for reasons that held up under pressure without anyone's permission. You can't take that from a person, and you don't need someone to hand it to you. You just have to do the work long enough and honestly enough that one day you look up and it's already there.